It's time for Cookies and Crime. This is the story of Vera Renzi, a woman with many lovers, and her lovers, well, she would be their last. Vera was born in Bucharest, Romania, 1903, and at the age of 15, started having a lot of behavioral issues. She was constantly running away with her boyfriends, and many of them were way older than her. Vera was described as having almost a pathological desire for male companionship. She was also very jealous and always suspicious. Before she turned 20, Vera married her first husband, a wealthy Austrian banker named Karl Schick. They also had a son named Lorenzo. Vera would be left at home while her husband was working long hours, so she became suspicious that he was being unfaithful. Without any strong evidence, Vera, in a jealous rage, poisoned her husband's dinner wine with arsenic. She told her family and friends that Karl had abandoned her and their son, and claimed that a year later, she got word that he had died in a car accident. She soon remarried a man closer to her age this time. But again, their marriage was very difficult, and Vera suspected her husband of being unfaithful. After only being married for a few months, her husband disappeared. She claimed again to her family and friends that he had abandoned her. And a year later, she received a letter saying that he had intentions of leaving her forever. Vera never married again, but continued to date around, some relationships with married men. And like clockwork, they began disappearing, some months, weeks, and even days after meeting her. Anytime she was questioned about their whereabouts, she claimed that they were unfaithful and abandoned her. Her last lover and victim would be a bank officer named Milorad. Milorad's wife reported the disappearance to the police, but they ignored her. She did her own investigating and discovered that her husband had a mistress. She took that information to the police, and 2 inspectors went to question Vera. Vera admitted to the affair, but claimed he had left her. The police were so blinded by her beauty and the way she held herself that they abandoned their search. Milorad's wife was obviously upset and went back to the police. She reminded them that Vera's husband and son were missing, and no one knows the whereabouts of all of her lovers. So the police went back to question her again. This time, Vera denied ever having an affair with Milorad. But the police had evidence, so they searched her home. They discovered a locked underground cellar. In that cellar were 35 coffins. In the middle of the cellar was a large red armchair, a church candle, and an empty bottle of champagne. She told the police that these were the bodies of her deceased family members, but when they opened it up, they found the bodies of all the men that had been missing. She confessed to poisoning all of the men with arsenic because she believed that they were unfaithful or their interest in her was fading. She would sit in that red armchair, sip champagne, and take in the view of all the men she murdered. At the time, Yugoslavia didn't execute women, so she was sentenced to life in prison. It's time for Cookies and Crime. This is the story of the Bosco murders, where reoccurring nightmares became reality. In early 1993, John and Nancy Bosco moved from Colorado to Big Fork, Montana. They stumbled on their dream home that had a woodworking studio attached. John was a furniture maker, and supposedly the land that the house was on was zoned for commercial use so that he could do his business from home. So that was a huge deciding factor for them. Soon after they moved into the home, John learned that the house actually wasn't zoned for commercial purposes, and if he tried to run his business from home, it would be illegal. Obviously, John was very upset about this because it was the one reason that they moved, so he confronted the previous owners who sold it to him. But Joe Clark, the previous owner, claims that he never lied and disclosed everything he knew about the house. Around the same time, John's mother, Toni Bosco, had a horrible nightmare that her son was killed by a large killing machine. And even though these types of nightmares happen to a lot of people at least once, she couldn't shake this off. Thinking that this could be a premonition, she wanted to talk to her son about this dream, but he was so busy with the new house drama, and he also had to fly back to Colorado for a custody battle with his ex-wife, she put it on the back burner to not stress him out anymore. Then on August 19, 1993, Toni receives a call from the Montana police saying that John and Nancy were brutally murdered in their home. A neighbor noticed that their car was still in the driveway and it was packed ready to go for a trip. Becoming suspicious, the neighbor walked around the home and found a bathroom window open, and as they got closer, a horrible stench came out of the window. Police were called, and that's when they found the couple in bed swarmed with flies and maggots because they had been dead for a week. It was clear that they were murdered because there were bullets in their heads. The murderer broke in from the bathroom window, shut off the electricity, and cut the power lines before murdering them in their sleep. And surprisingly, the murderer left no evidence. The first suspect was John's ex-wife, which seemed plausible because they were supposed to fly back to Colorado for a nasty custody battle, but there was no concrete evidence there. Then the police discovered all of the drama that was going on between John and the previous owner. By the time he was murdered, the tension was so high that John was ready to sue Joe Clark over the home. But again, there was no concrete evidence there. Tony Bosco, John's mother, becomes impatient with the police and decides to take matters into her own hands and hires a psychic. She hires Danny and Brinkley, a super famous psychic who's known to have made a lot of accurate predictions. During their session, Danian relives the night of the murder in the perspective of the murderer. He sees the reflection of the murderer in a mirror and describes him as a teenage boy with medium build. He says he looks like a college student and says that the boy is attending college out west. He also says that the house feels familiar to him, like the murderer has been there before. The last thing he predicts is that the murderer will be caught in December 1993. Tony brings this information to the police, but obviously they don't take her seriously. But then, on December 7th, 1993, they found the murderer.
Story time about how I got bullied my last year of high school by the most popular girl. Okay, so this is my story time. A lot of you requested one, but I'm also at the airport, so sorry for any noise. So most of my high school years were spent in Nicaragua, except for my last year of high school. You see, I booked a show in Miami, so I had to move to the US. I was also doing modeling, commercials, and a lot of radio. I enrolled in the local high school, and it was like literally culture shock for me. I had never experienced an American high school, American parties, or even like actually mingled with American kids. I was really shocked to see how adult they were. For example, boys and girls were doing adult things. I was constantly being invited to parties where people were drinking, but I never actually went. So the most popular girl in school decided to befriend me in quotation marks. By the way, there were so many times where I spent lunch in the bathroom like Caddy from Mean Girls. It was like Mean Girls but real life. So this popular girl, she was also a model, and we kind of bonded over that. But behind my back, she had a bet to see which boy would take me to prom. She wanted to see how far this boy could get with me, if you know what I mean. Part 2 might not be up, sorry. Part 2 of how I got bullied by the most popular girl in school. This is my story time. So this popular girl who befriended me had a bet with boys to see which one would take me to prom. Specifically because she wanted to see how far they would get with me on prom night, if you know what I mean. I kept saying no to every single boy. Because I was the new girl, I was constantly getting hit on, but a lot of these boys had girlfriends. Well, since I said no to every single boy, this mean girl decided to print out flyers of the show that I was in. So basically the poster of the show. And when I got to school the next day, there were so many posters of me on the walls, on the floor, with a lot of things drawn on my face. They were even in the boys' locker room. Then someone made up the rumor that I did that, because supposedly I wanted everyone to know that I was a working actress. I was really embarrassed, but at the same time, I kind of thought it was funny, and this really upset the popular girl. So she decided to take it a step further. She invited me to her house one day, and because I thought she was my friend, I decided to go. She cooked me pasta and we talked for a while. Then 2 boys show up. She told me one of them would be my prom date. Part 3 of how I got bullied by the most popular girl in school. This is my story, by the way. So I'm at the popular girl's house, and suddenly 2 boys show up, and she says one of them was my date. That's when I told her that I did not want a date for prom. And then the boy asked to speak to me. I talked to him and I told him that I definitely did not want to go on a date with him and that I didn't even know him. That's when he told me that my friend had set everything up, and she told him that I liked him a lot. Well, I told him that that was not true, and I basically went home. A few days later, she started a rumor saying that I was totally in love with her and that I forced her to kiss me. Yeah, she's crazy. That's when people started calling me horrible, horrible names. But the joke's on her, because I was so used to getting bullied in Nicaragua. After school one day, she comes up to me and starts telling me why she doesn't like me. She was so angry she started to cry. She said that she was the pretty girl and that she was the model in school. I literally just walked away from her. I went to prom with no date, which was so fun. I graduated and then I kept working. Guess who slid into my DMs a few weeks ago asking to hang out? That's right, the popular girl. I think she must have seen my TikTok or something. Should I actually go out with her and tell her what I think? Or should I just leave her on red? You guys decide.
You guys let me know if you like this format better of me talking over my story time. But basically, this is the story time about how me and my brother almost got kidnapped. We didn't quite get kidnapped, okay? We did not get kidnapped. We were totally fine. I just want to preface that. But essentially, I was about 4 and my brother was 9. Now, the house we lived in growing up, there was a swing set and a basketball hoop in the front yard. Now, there was this one day where me and my brother were out in the front. I was playing on the swing set. He was playing basketball. And I'm gonna try to explain this the best I can, but you know how you can kind of twist yourself up in swings and then you can release and you'll like spin back the other way. So there was this one day where I was just doing that repeatedly, and all of a sudden this random car just starts barreling down the street. It was basically this really old looking car, and this guy had come speeding down our street. He goes all the way to the end, pulls into a driveway, pulls back out, turns around, and stops right in front of our house. After this guy literally stops right in front of our house, he gets out, and I'll never forget what this guy looks like. He was wearing this really old suit that literally looked like it was from the 70s. It was brown, and this guy was kind of short and stocky, and he had these sunglasses on. So this guy starts approaching me and my brother, specifically me, and as he gets closer to me, my brother starts to yell at me to come inside the house. Now, even though I was 4 years old, I still knew something was really off about this situation, but keep in mind, I had been spinning in this swing for so long, and at this point, I was so twisted up, I literally couldn't release myself. This guy was so close to me at this point, and my brother had to turn around, untangle me from the swing, and get me in the house. Right as my brother was able to untangle me, this guy was like maybe a foot away from just grabbing me. And I was absolutely terrified at this point. I'll never forget that moment. So me and my brother start running into the house as fast as we can, and luckily we get inside. And I'm pretty sure when we got inside, our grandma was asleep in the living room. I don't even think she knew we were outside. So luckily for us, we ended up being totally fine. And I'm assuming the guy left very quickly after we got inside the house. My brother ended up telling my parents. They had a sit-down conversation with us, and from that point on, they monitored us really closely. But yeah, guys, I guess it's just a good reminder to always be aware of your surroundings. Watch your kids, because you never know where some creep's gonna pull up.
My boyfriend and I have been dating for over 3 years. His birthday was coming up and I wanted it to be special. I decided to pick out a day where I went to the mall and got things that I thought he'd like and put it all together as a big present. While I was there, I ran into a friend of his named Matt. I told Matt what I was planning, and since he was his close friend, I asked him if he'd be willing to help me pick out some things. Matt of course agreed, so we hit up some shops to find things that we both thought my boyfriend would really like. My boyfriend and I had recently moved in together, and I knew that he was working, but his job's hours are always changing, so I didn't know when he'd get home. I didn't want him to catch me red-handed with all of the things before I hid them, so I asked him what he was doing and when he'd be home. That's when he told me that he was already off work and hanging out with Matt at the bars. This immediately stopped me in my tracks because there was no way he'd be hanging out with him since Matt was just a few feet away from me in the store. When I told Matt, he was confused too because he was never asked by my boyfriend to hang out at the bar. We have a very trusting relationship, so normally I'd believe him, but in this case I knew that it was a lie. I wasn't sure what to do because he's never lied to me before, or at least I've never caught him in a lie like this. That's when I decided to go home and wait for him. Part 2 of how my boyfriend lied to me about who he was with. When my boyfriend got home, he acted completely normal. I asked him how it was hanging out with Matt at the bar. He told me about his day and told me how him and Matt just grabbed a few drinks nonchalantly. This made me angry because I knew he was lying, but I wasn't sure how to bring up the truth. I also didn't know how to tell him that I was hanging out with Matt without bringing up that I was also shopping for his birthday present. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt and let it be. However, when we were laying in bed later that night, I couldn't take it anymore and confronted him. I told him I ran into Matt at the mall when he texted me, so I know it wasn't Matt who he was hanging out with. He quickly got frazzled and I could tell he was trying not to tell me something. However, this only made me more curious. Finally, he told me to wait a minute and he left the room. When he came back, I sat up and he came to my side of the bed. He took out a box from behind his back and got on one knee. My eyes widened. He confessed that he was out ring shopping for me because he knew I was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. We had a weekend getaway planned for his birthday and he was going to propose to me on one of the days we were there. I was shocked. Of course I said yes and tackled him in a big hug. We went on our trip together and it was amazing. Now it's a funny story that we tell everyone.